Good morning, councillors. Good morning, officers. Welcome to this September session of the Economy and Development Select, the first one proper in its own right. I know we had a special meeting with Adult Select earlier in the month. Before we go into the agenda, if we do just a quick round of introductions for our listeners out there. So I'm Councillor Paul Pavian. I'm chair of this committee.
Paula Harris, Scrutiny.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Sarah Jones, Cabinet Member for Social Justice and Community Development.
Kath Fallon, Head of Enterprise and Community Development.
Richard Simpkins, Business Manager for Tourism, Leisure, Culture and Youth.
Matthew Lewis, interim part of the Mon Life team, leading on performance.
Matt Feekins, member of the committee.
Alan Davis, Vice Chairman and member of the committee.
Brian Strong, member of this committee.
David Dovey, member of this committee.
Ian Saunders, Head of Tourism, Leisure, Youth and Culture.
Marie Bartlett, Finance Lead for the Mon Life project.
Okay, thank you everyone. Can I firstly welcome Francis Williams to your first select committee. Very welcome. Looking forward to working with you from now on into the future. You've obviously got some problem with your microphone there, so you may have to share. Yeah, if that's okay. So if we go into the agenda, then item 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, Richard?
Just one chair from Councillor Roden.
Thank you. Okay. Item number 2 then, declarations of interest in terms of items on the agenda. Anyone to alert the stage? Councillor Feekins?
Personal interest on the Mon Life.
Okay. You've got your declaration form. Oh, you've done it. Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay. Item number 3 then, public open forum. I don't think there's anyone from the public this morning to take up that opportunity. So item number 4 then, the presentation regarding Superfast Cymru 2 broadband procurement and future plans. We were due to have Welsh Government officials here this morning, but they aren't. I think we've got an explanation as to why. Kath, do you want to first give that explanation, and then I'll go to the Cabinet Member then for a follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we had arranged for Viv Collins, who's Programme Manager for Superfast Cymru, to attend today. It turns out apparently that unfortunately she's on annual leave, so I did have an email from her colleague. Part of the issue is the fact that the Superfast Cymru 2, which is the next wave of Superfast Cymru broadband, the contract was due to be announced a couple of weeks back, I think, and still is yet to be announced. So they're still in procurement stage, so therefore they're not in a position to be able to share their next steps. However, we did invite the Minister, Julie James, Leader of the House, to an event in Llandudno Rhydderch last week. So we thought it would be useful to give you an update in terms of what we learned from there, which was at a public meeting. Basically, we were told that the Superfast Cymru 1 rollout had made their target. However, they are in a position now where they have what they term as stranded assets. So we've got communities, well, not just in Monmouthshire, but across Wales, where BT have got so far with the infrastructure and then stopped due to the end of the contract. So we're in a position now where there is extra funding. There's 80 million to be released for Superfast Cymru 2. However, where connections were costing £300 under Superfast Cymru 1, clearly these are the harder to reach properties and premises, so they're looking to be sort of at a cost at £1,200 per property. So clearly it's not going to be a fast rollout in the second phase. She was therefore encouraging communities like, for example, Llandudno Rhydderch, who were in a position where they were literally at the point of connection and then the programme stopped, to actually look at a local community solution. Whereby there is additional funds and they can work with a facilitation group within Welsh Government to actually look at how they can access that infrastructure in a slightly different way. There are some quite good examples of how that's happened. One is in Newport, where they're getting very good speed. So as far as our team is concerned, we're very keen now to hear from communities that are sort of a stranded asset to see how we can work with them individually. It would appear that Welsh Government do not know where all these communities are or where all these premises are from the data that they have, so they are keen for people to actually contact them directly, and if you also want to contact us at the same time, that would be helpful, and then we can see how we can facilitate that process. So although there's another 4 years of the scheme to go on, the Minister did say you were either at the front or at the back, and they actually don't know where the contractor, whoever they may be, are going to be going next. So they are encouraging these local community solutions. So as soon as we have more detail, we will share that with you, and as soon as the procurement process is over, we will obviously invite Welsh Government to come back and present that to you. So Sarah, I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add.
Not on the technical aspects of it. I think there's just a couple of things I wanted to say, and it's really disappointing Welsh Government aren't here today for two reasons, because we wanted the update, but also we want to be able to scrutinise them over the performance under the Superfast Cymru 1 rollout, because there were real issues there. And I think it's particularly disappointing because the Minister was actually really good when we met her last week, and, you know, really open and willing to work with us as an organisation and with our communities. So for her officials not to follow up today, I think is disappointing. I'd be really keen that hopefully they'll come back to a future meeting here to be able to be challenged over some of the activity. I think just a couple of other things to say. We've been really proactive as a council. So when the consultation came out towards the end of Superfast Cymru 1, we were asking for money to be devolved down to the council so we could identify bespoke solutions here to support the communities through the funding that's available. And I think that's almost a success, because they are saying they are going to allow us, all our communities, to have funding directly to identify bespoke, tailor-made solutions that will work for the community, irrespective of the rollout of Superfast Cymru 2. So I think that's a positive, and that's something we campaign for as a council. I think, you know, there's still a long way to go. I think concerns are that, you know, there's been 9 months since the end of the last round of Superfast Cymru. They're still in a procurement process now. I'm not quite sure why this process wasn't started during Superfast Cymru 1, because they knew there was going to be an end point. So again, we need to challenge on that. But as I said, I'm hopeful that we've got opportunities to work with Welsh Government, with the officials. The Minister was very good when we met her. So whilst it's disappointing that officials aren't here today, I think if you've got queries within your own wards, you know, work with us, and we'll work with Welsh Government to identify solutions, and we'll do all that we can, because we know how important getting that digital infrastructure in place is. Because really there is that digital divide that's happening. It's real, it's present, and it's having a real impact on our local communities.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Kath, as well. As the chair of the committee, I'm equally as disappointed. Setting aside the delays to the procurement process, I mean, officials would have known about the delays for some time. And, you know, it would have been good to have an update and certainly scrutinise the Superfast Cymru 1. But as a committee, we've got so much work on that, and particularly with the ADM and the tight timescales, we're looking to set aside extraordinary meetings to try and cram the work in. You know, we need, when we invite people to come in, we expect them to come in. If there's an issue, you know, a genuine issue where they can't come in, then okay. But, you know, for me, this is not acceptable. I hope that that you will support me in writing back to Welsh Government and setting out the reasons why we find it unacceptable, and certainly asking them to come back. I don't know whether any councillors want to contribute at this stage. I don't really want to open it up too much, because we've still got a lot of issues to focus on. Councillor Davis.
Sorry. Actually, no facility in place to keep that contract going. It's astounding to me. You know, I talk about forward planning. You know, the consequences here are not just for individuals in the community, but for our business environment as well. And I think we as a committee are, as you know, trying to push the enterprise portfolio and bring more businesses to Monmouthshire. And it's extremely disappointing, I think, that, you know, people are not making it easy for us, but making it harder. And I think our message needs to be sent back. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other comments? No? Right. Okay. But we'll action that. We'll send that letter to Welsh Government. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Do the other officers want to come to the table? Yep. Okay. Okay, well, we're just getting technical side set up. Okay, so item number 5 is in relation to the performance and evaluation framework for MonLife. You'll see the purpose is of this report is to receive the draft performance evaluation framework that will underpin a business management framework for the new delivery model of MonLife. In terms of recommendations, and I'll come back to this at the end of the session, just to remind members, is for us to review, scrutinise and make recommendations on the draft performance and evaluation framework for measuring outcomes of the new delivery model for MonLife. So while we're just organising the technical side, Francis, Kath, do you want to give just a very brief intro before the presentation?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, the purpose of today's report really is to, as you say, to give an overview of the evaluation framework. The framework is based around the current business planning framework, but actually demonstrates an opportunity for the new entity to move forward. Let's have a look. Sorry, just while there's one. It's based around the vision of the model, which is looking to enrich people's lives and create vibrant places, and links then around the aims, which is looking at enriching lives through participation and activity, and then building strong and vibrant places and communities in Monmouthshire. Also aligns with the culture and value to enable people to be the best they can. A successful business powered by its people, providing excellent customer services, building strong networks and partnerships, making informed decisions based on business intelligence, and then growing the sustainable business. So there are action plans within each of the different areas, and there's a branding and marketing strategy, and I understand the appointment has been made for that branding and marketing company now, so that will be taken forward. Also links in terms of ensuring that the employee sort of aims and objectives are addressed, and also our customer and user engagement. So look what else I can pull up off here. Okay, sorry, excuse me. So the purpose of the framework really will enable the board of directors and the trustees and the trading subsidiaries to assess their own performance, whilst also embracing our performance reporting requirements to ensure that the group will actually contribute to the council's corporate plan, to the PSB's wellbeing objectives, to ensure so that we're performing on the relevant Welsh Government key performance indicators, and also the outcome frameworks in terms of ESTIN and the strategic and operational risk management approach. So the framework that's been put forward is looking to provide a consistent, robust performance framework which allow us to assess performance, as well as the basis for any strategic risk management, and to drive forward improvements in terms of integrated delivery and strategic planning, and will also help us refine and develop programmes then as we're going forward. But whilst also ensuring there's legislative compliance, whilst also ensuring that we align with external monitoring and evaluation. And also to ensure that the MonLife will be cost effective moving forward and building on good practice and not actually reinventing the wheel, really. I think that's probably about as far as I can go at the moment in terms of Matthew, whether he wants to start picking up some of the detail. Yeah. Okay.
That's fine. Yeah. Yeah.
So I've done you an introduction.
No, it's okay. Thanks, Matthew. Yeah. We'll circulate the slides to members. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Matthew.
I apologise for that. I'll just talk to it. As Kath has said, we're presenting the draft performance and evaluation framework for MonLife. The intention is that we have an integrated business planning, monitoring and evaluation framework across all of MonLife's activities. That's obviously in place so we can measure performance, evidence impact and drive continuous improvement. Intention is to have one shared framework across the charity MonLife and the local authority trading company MonLife Plus and the associated trading companies, trading subsidiaries. So obviously this is an opportunity for you to further review, scrutinise and make recommendations on the draft, which is attached as the appendix on the report. We've reflected, we took this report to Audit Committee a couple of weeks ago. We've reflected on Audit Committee's consideration. Appendix 3, I think it is, has some of the questions that were asked at Audit Committee and some answers, and we've made some changes in terms of what we're going to present now, reflecting that discussion. It's worth saying, of course, that the final framework will also be developed with the Shadow Board and Directors prior to enactment. It's also worth saying that this is going to develop over time as MonLife establishes and progresses new programmes for delivery. Our approach at the moment has been to consolidate the key performance indicators and business matrices that are already in place across tourism, leisure, culture, youth and youth service, but to add to those and in some cases to amend them, which I'll just highlight in a minute. The reason we've done that is we want to maintain the existing measures in the interim period. We recognise that they're not all necessarily the most perfect measures, but the best thing to do is to keep measuring them so that we don't end up with gaps in the data. We're developing a new framework which is intended to do two things. It's to support the Council's established business process and also meet the requirements of the new charity and companies so that MonLife can assess its performance and embrace the Council's reporting requirements in terms of the Council's assessment of MonLife's overall contribution. I'm going to have to refer you now to the papers because I was going to have a slide, but on the second page of the report you'll see a diagram 1, which is the sort of summarises the proposed framework. At the heart of this is the MonLife business plan, which will indicate how MonLife intends to contribute to the wider context. So that's the PSB's wellbeing plan, the corporate plan, and the wider legislative and policy context. Our intention is then that we identify programmes and actions, obviously, in the business plan, and that we use a smart programme and team action plan process to manage that. So I'm going to have to refer you now to a different sheet. If you turn to figure 2 at the back of Appendix 1, which is that document, that's the sort of indication of the sort of approach. Is indicative at this stage, but that's the general approach that we're proposing for team and programme action plans. So basically the detail of how we would break down those higher level actions. We have modified this table slightly from the discussion at Audit Committee to hopefully make it a little bit clearer how the RAG rating would be used. And also we had a discussion at Audit Committee about about risk management, and I think we've made it clearer both in this and the rest of the documentation that the team management action plan process is more about how we manage operational risk, which is in addition to a process for managing strategic risk, which is referred to in one of the answers to the questions in Appendix 3. So in terms of the papers before you, in Appendix 1, Table 2, which is the long table, sets out the proposed new measures. As I say, many of those are taken from what we're already measuring, but there are new measures proposed, including additional financial measures, staff engagement and marketing performance measures, which have yet to be developed as we're still working on the marketing strategy. It's worth saying that existing services are already measuring outcomes in terms of key grant aided and partnership programs at a significantly greater level of detail. And there's just a summary, it's not a complete list, but there's a summary of those in Table 3. Just to take the first one as an example, for the Living Levels Landscape Partnership Programme, we've got 52 individual output and outcome measures which we need to report to Heritage Lottery Fund on. And that is repeated across quite a number of detailed programmes. I haven't listed all of those because it would go on for pages, but it's just worth making that point. And finally, we have been collecting information in terms of recording case studies of outcomes and the benefits. We're probably guilty of not doing that in perhaps as quite a structured way as we can. And so the last table, which is figure 3 in Appendix 1, sets out a more consistent way of gathering that information and making sure that then that reports back to, we're gathering the information in terms of volunteer stories, user stories, but we're setting it back into the context of what our policy objectives were in that case. So I'm going to stop here, and then Rich is going to talk a little bit more about how we're intending to develop an outcome measurement framework and the systems behind that.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Yep, so the intention is that by consolidating our existing measures...
Yep. Can you put your mic on, Councillor Debbie? Sorry.
Bearing in mind we don't have anything up on the screen in front of us, when you move to...
You should have the presentation sent to you now, so it should be in your inbox. Yeah, you've got it.
Here,
okay.
When you moved from here to area, if you could just cite the page number, then we wouldn't be chasing around trying to catch up and be in the right place at the right time. That's all.
That's fair comment. Thank you. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, yeah, so this should be page number 7, I believe, in the presentation. So the intention is, by consolidating existing measures and new measures, it's going to ensure consistency and longevity of the data sets. MonLife, TLC-wide currently records a significant amount of output data, and moving into the MonLife model, the intention is that we will continue with that output data because it is key information, but we want to obviously look at measuring more of the outcomes, because we are obviously aware of the impact that our service areas have on people's lives. And I think it's, we want to reflect the potential. It is complexity and with the outcome measures, but we really want to showcase what the difference that makes on people's lives. There is a task and finish group that has already started work on developing outcome measurement framework, and that's a number of different staff from across the service areas are involved in that group. And at the moment, the work that's been undertaken is to look at good practice that's across the service areas, and also to develop the principles for a new approach and ways of working. As this develops, existing measures will be reviewed and refined accordingly. And then if you move on to the next slide, which is slide 8, I believe, the outcome measurement framework, the idea is a long-term basis for future impact assessment, based on pillars that have been designed as part of the working group, 4 pillars, which we'll come on to, reflecting the potential scope of MonLife's impact, and also grouping measurement and reporting of actions so that there's consistency across. The initial scoping against, it needs to be in line with obviously the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, the Office for National Statistics measures of national well-being, the Public Service Board Wellbeing Plan, and of course the Council's corporate plan. The 4 pillars that have been identified that really align with the work that we're currently doing has come out as thriving, healthy and connected and fair. And the intention is to define what success would look like for each pillar and the measures to assess the success of actually achieving this moving forwards. If you move on to the last slide, which I'm hoping you've got in front of you there, this is basically a snapshot of a set of data that we use from within our leisure centres. It's a whole set of key performance indicators, which is basically based around our current membership base across the 4 leisure centres. Within that, we've got information around our core memberships, our swimming, Learn to Swim programme memberships, and it will give you all sorts of data. There's quite a bit of work that goes into this document around new members, cancelled members, retention rates, attrition rates, growth, etc. And also we've built in against the budget how many members we need per site to achieve our financial targets. The intention is that we're developing this further this piece of software is actually called Cascade 3D, which taps into our front of house processing system where all of our data is held. But the intention is to develop this Clarity Analytics tool, which is like a management framework looking at key sets of data, which gives you live data to the minute, to the second, of everything we do, and it's more of an automated tool, so it takes away a lot of the data input that we currently have to do ourselves. So that just gives you an idea of the type of performance data we have that we really want to develop across all of our service areas. Predominantly we've used this within leisure, but at the moment we're doing a complete rollout across all of our services in TLCY so that we have a consistent reporting tool and evaluation framework to give us some consistency and really zone in on the key areas that we know we need to make this successful. So that concludes the presentation. Thanks very much for your time. Are there any questions?
Okay, I'll open it up now. I know there's a lot of questions that want to be asked. Councillor Feakins first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Richard and Matt. There's still lots of questions around the ADM, without a shadow of a doubt, and it might be that an easier way to help members understand a lot of those, I say issues and issues, is just an understanding at the moment. There's swaths of information which we're not privy to. You guys are living it, eating it, breathing it, sleeping it. You're doing it for the last 3 years. You know everything about it. That hasn't translated back across to us fully yet, and I think that's a piece of work we need to do to understand from this side exactly where we are and where we're going and everything else. Not saying there's anything missing at the moment, because you just probably haven't delivered that information to us, and we just probably haven't asked for that relevant information, I'm guessing. So I'd suggest later in the day that we would have a workshop or something, like I say, to make that happen. Just bringing this back down to the performance framework. Externally, nothing's going to change. Externally, we're still going to have statutory responsibilities. We're still going to have Welsh Government performance indicators which we need to hit, and all those things. There's statutory things which as the ADM, which I'll refer it back to the ADM if I may for a short while. But certainly there are statutory reporting mechanisms which we need to perform from day zero onwards. Day zero being the day that we've carved off the ADM away from MCC. Those things are going to happen. So my encouragement would be to say, well, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel on day zero, let's just keep everything in place as it is at the moment, because that external reporting is still statutory. We need to do it. Let's keep it in place. This is an internal division. There's an internal division between services that we're providing at the moment within MCC, and we're basically dividing that off, carving it off to creating a new entity to do it. This is an internal reporting mechanism. As much as we've got a lot of fine words and everything in front of us, for me it's about understanding the relationship between the ADM and us as the council. Us as the council, as MCC, are the shareholders in this scheme. We need to have a report to shareholders coming back through. The functioning of the reporting mechanisms within the ADM are statutory. You know, once that's carved off, we as an Economy and Development Select Committee don't have any input in that. We're just trusting the board and everyone else to do with the ADM. I've got the grasp of this, I've grasped the nettle and are running with it, and we're happy that they're doing it. If we haven't got the reassurances at the front end of that, then it probably, then I suspect that MCC members probably haven't got the reassurances in place to make that happen. So that's a piece of work we definitely need to make sure that's in place. But really, I think we need to hone in on the reporting from the ADM back through to MCC, where shareholders, I would expect to see a report to shareholders coming back through. And then it asks the questions, what are we MCC looking for? And this is something that was picked up in audit. And you know, really, what are we as MCC? What are the key drivers? Are we looking for the ADM to be a financial model? We don't care from day zero onwards, because that's not our responsibility. Our responsibility would have finished. From day zero onwards, that's the ADM's responsibility. From that point onwards, we need to be very clear as MCC what we're looking out of this. But what do we want out of it? We want value for money. Is the ADM delivering services to us as competitively as we can get it elsewhere? Probably. That's one thing I would think that we're wearing two hats at this stage. That's something I would expect us to have and to understand. And that's not just a financial thing. That's going to be two things. It's going to be service deliverability against Welsh Government indicators, because at the end of the day, the culpability, I suspect, will still rest with MCC. So if something doesn't go right with the ADM, and MCC haven't picked up that issue, and the ADM something just falls between the cracks. It's a big project, if something doesn't fall between the cracks, I'll be bloody amazed, to be honest. But if something does fall between the cracks, the culpability is going to come back and sit with MCC. So I think MCC need to understand how that relationship is going to work. How does it then step back into the fore and say, actually, there's an issue there, or where are those issues? And so there's a little bit of work there I think probably we need to understand. But really, for me, it's about, right at this moment in time, it's as much as that everything before us. And this isn't a great, like I said, you guys live and eat and breathe, and you know a lot of this information. But what the reporting element that we've got in front of us at the moment, performance and evaluation framework for Mon Life, is pretty much going to be an internal document post ground day zero. For me, I think we desperately need to see what those relationships are going to be post day zero for MCC ADM.
Okay, Francis, do you want to answer that?
Is that working? Yeah, great. Thank you. I think it raised a number of valid points there, because it's important that the Select Committee today have the opportunity to understand exactly how that relationship is going to work, and how both the Council in a Select Committee and Cabinet will have transparency and visibility over the operations and performance of the ADM going forward. The performance framework that we're looking at today, yes, it does set out the governance and performance arrangements that will be reporting within the Mon Life and the Mon Life Plus model, but how that relationship works with MCC is critical. And I think that's a valid point for us to debate this morning, in terms of, are you getting the visibility that you require within those arrangements going forward, not just from day zero, but long term as well. Now, some of the contractual arrangements that will be in place between us as the Council and the ADM will set out that that arrangement, and how that reporting mechanism will work, and how we will be able, through the contract, to have that visibility as well. So there will be mechanisms there, but I think that point around how we, whether we run a workshop or whether we run a session to set out how the governance arrangements are going to work, might be a good piece of work for us to do, to be really clear at this juncture before we go forward with the final decisions about how this is all going to work from both sides. Because you're right, the team are in the thick of it. They're working up, getting ready and gearing up for that commencement date, and I think it's just making sure we're clear about the relationships. Thank you.
Do you want to come back, Matt?
No, I need to say that I had the reassurance that they have got it on board. It's just, I think it's just, we've got to get that translation back over to members to make that process as smooth as we can. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Strong and then Councillor Davis.
It was Richard was talking about the performances of of the different leisure centres, really. If Monmouth, for example, has just been opened and it's a fantastic place, it's got spinning, weightlifting and fitness classes, etc. I just wondered if you'd had a chance, I know it's only been going for a month or so, whether you'd had a chance to see what the numbers were like and whether it was on an increasing demand for these facilities, because if that is, as I think it will be, a success, is the intention through the different company, is the intention to perhaps improve the facilities at the other leisure centres?
Yep, so we've been monitoring very closely the performance of Monmouth, both financial and user numbers through. And as you'd expect, the membership growth has been significant. We did a really good job of housing our temporary fitness provision in the market hall in Monmouth during the closure of the site. And we came back with around just under 700 members, which has quite quickly grown to around 1,000 mark, which is really positive. We're monitoring, obviously, the financial aspect to make sure that things are on target. So we're really pleased. We're growing the classes, that we've got the number of classes because the demand is there. So all different elements are being looked at and monitored very closely. In answer to the second part of the question, the intention is definitely, we can see that this new redesign and model has definitely had a massive impact. And for our services to be sustainable moving forwards, I think we would all agree that that sort of investment would be welcomed across the other sites. All of our other leisure centres, the 1970s build, we've redesigned where we can with what budget we've had. But I think we've really noticed the impact and the opportunity with sustainability of these services with the level of investment we've had in Monmouth. So the intention would be yes, if that is the definite intention, that we would love to redesign some of our other sites, and we know there's definite potential there for growth and redesign. Okay.
Do you want to come back, Brian? No, okay. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, Matt raised a few of the issues that I was going to raise, but I think there's two aspects to this. There's the reporting back to the MCC, right? And as an ex-manager myself, there's the reporting, the internal reporting structure within the business. And you said the magic word just then, which I haven't heard previously, which was targets, okay? Because if we're going to challenge ourselves, or this business is going to challenge itself, then it must have targets and business plans for those targets. Now, I'm not seeing that at the moment. I'm not saying that they don't exist. But, I mean, as a manager, if we separate it into MCC, there are certain things that MCC will need to be able to look at and scrutinise. But I think what we don't want is a list of 1,000 different things, which is what we appear to have here. Because within any structure, within any business, there are those key performance indicators, which as a manager, whoever that's going to be, I don't know who it is, maybe somebody in this room, I don't know. But you will be able to look at that on a day-to-day basis and get a good feel for how the business is actually going, you know. And if we look at the comparative data for local authorities, for example, in terms of the number of visitors to leisure centres, we are quite low. I think we're in the lower quartile in terms of those numbers. So refurbishing the leisure centres is obviously good, but there are other things perhaps that need to be done to attract more families, which are not perhaps sport orientated, but to have those community facilities we've spoken about, using council assets for various things like mental health, obesity and that sort of thing, which is all within the Future Generations Act, which will bring people within the leisure centre who may possibly, well, yes, be spending money as well. So I think there's two approaches. I think it would be a mistake just to say if we improve the facilities that we're automatically going to attract more customers. That may work in the short term, but it may not work as time progresses. So I think I'm not seeing the targeting within this organisation here, and that's what I want to see as a manager. I want to know what are our targets, what are the plans we have for implementing those targets, and those targets, you know, maybe over several years, because we all know that nothing changes within a short time period. But to just quote a list of however many items there are, and they're all valid, they're all great, but where are those key performance indicators. What are the key targets for this company? What are we saying in 2 years' time we should be in this position? We should have X number of more members. We should be generating this much more financial capital. And I'm just talking about the Monlife part now, because the opportunities perhaps are more limited in Monlife than they are in the Tecal company, which has the potential to generate quite a lot of income, you know, from out. So it's 20% of its turnover, I believe, can go as extra income, you know, providing that we are not taking advantage of our position as a local authority. So I think that's where the key lies in terms of generating lots of income. But in terms of improving the performance of Monlife, we really need to look at this in terms of what are we going to achieve in 5 years' time. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, can I bring in Ian Saunders to respond? Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Davis, and take on board those comments. And indeed, targets are important in any business, as you quite rightly say. I think from where we are at the moment, we've really tried, and Richard has explained how we're trying to put a consistent approach across all these services. They come from various backgrounds and they're at various different levels of commercial or different service operations, shall we say. The work we've done over the past 3 years whilst we've been doing this project has been very much about trying to introduce new ways of working across, looking at the targets. And of course, some of the measures we've got already aren't really reflective of any positive outcome. The number, I mean, for instance, the Welsh Government statistic of per 1,000 visits per leisure centre is an when you look at actually get underneath what that means, because you cannot, because we've got dual use sites, we cannot count educational use in those statistics. So if you're a standalone leisure centre in Cwmbran, you can count all day long every visit you have. When you're a Monmouthshire dual use facility, those statistics mean that we are disadvantaged, shall we say, by the visits we have, because we cannot simply count them all. I would say our sites, because of the very nature of dual use, means that they are extremely well used. And I think if you could put in all of the visits to the leisure centres, you would, of course, have really increased numbers. But then Richard did mention about the importance of not just measuring outputs, but measuring outcomes. So if 10 people visit a leisure centre, 6 might be watching, 3 might be going for something else, and only 1 might be doing physical activity. So we've got to get underneath more detail on what we're delivering. I agree on the targets across the services. We certainly will be setting targets. And of course, what we've got now is a product of local authority measures over the past years, and we've reported regularly back into different select committees. So I think the opportunities there, as we've done to refresh those, really understand our markets, look better at our data, which is really important, and understanding what the usage of these services and businesses and who is using them. And also, as a conversation I had with Francis as we toured the sites only yesterday or the day before, about latent demand. And the question about investment has to go back into whether it's affordable and what markets are out there that we're currently not attracting into our leisure centres. I know at Monmouth Leisure Centre, one of the new facilities we've put in is toning tables, which I know already has attracted 60 to 70 people that have never been inside a leisure centre before, and they are now inside with confidence under our brilliant staff that are out there, having an absolute good experience, and hopefully they're telling their friends and family. And I agree with the conversation about families. It is about getting more people into these centres. But again, it's not just about leisure centres, it's about the whole beautiful countryside we've got, our attractions, and making these services all work together. So I think, going back to your question about targets, yes, they are important, and we've got to get a better understanding of, you know, what we've got. And hopefully, some of the framework you see in front of you is a start to that. But of course, working with our board and trustees, they will develop with their expertise and their knowledge as they come in and help, and also what the council wants as well. So I think it's the right question to be asking, and we've got to do better to make sure that you're confident that what we're measuring is the right things. Thank you.
Do you want to come back, Alan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think Ian mentioned key words there. It's the thinking is not going to be local authority thinking for this model to work. I mean, there are lots of examples of ADMs that haven't worked, that have failed. We don't want this one to fail. So I think, you know, that expertise that you'll have assisting you is going to be essential, I think, in that. And we need to think differently about the way we approach these things, and the management will need all the key information in order to make the right decisions, I think, and it's essential that don't overcomplicate it. Okay, thank you.
Do you want to come back, Matthew, briefly?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that one of the things we have been doing is looking for good practice in terms of how trusts are measuring, particularly on the impact and the outcome measuring. We've been lucky enough to get some support from quite one of the larger environmental charities in England and Wales. Attended a couple of workshops with them in terms of their outcome reporting mechanism, which we are pretty shamelessly borrowing. But you know, it looks, that's the basis on which the outcome measurement framework is being developed to take some really good practice, which is being set up as really good practice in the charity sector to evidence impact. So obviously there's a way to go on that, but that's, you know, we aren't just looking at this from a local authority perspective.
Okay, Councillor Devi.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask something different to what I was going to ask, because I think Alan has probably dotted all the I's and crossed the T's in where I would have been. But the one other area, when we're talking about leisure centres, where nothing is going to happen for some considerable length of time, is the leisure centre in Chepstow. And I think we have a duty of care to make sure that that leisure centre survives. I know some money has been spent on it, but we have got this leisure centre there which needs to be kept alive and needs to perform, otherwise habits will change and people will go elsewhere and develop relationships elsewhere. And it could be a very difficult journey for the leisure centre in Chepstow when the school is developed. I mean, we don't even have an idea of what the development is going to be for the school and the leisure centre. So what I am concerned is that the leisure centre there is kept up to date as much as it possibly can be, bearing in mind the timescales, to let it survive in the future and be a success and be there. If it turns out to be going rather badly for it, you can just imagine somebody saying, well, it's beyond the point of recoup. We won't do a leisure centre for Chepstow. I mean, that's doom and gloom, but I mean, that is the thing that really does concern me. And the other fact is, of course, Chepstow is in the middle of our two key developments, which are Caldecott and Monmouth, with excellent leisure centres in place now. And if you think about it, everybody is fishing out of the same pool, which is, if you like, central Monmouthshire, perhaps running into Gloucestershire, perhaps running down beyond Caldecott. So what I want to know is, have we some plan to look after Chepstow while all this is going on, and it is going to have to survive for some years as it is. Thank you, Chair.
Ian, do you want to come back? Yep.
Yes, Councillor Dovey, thank you for your comments on the leisure centre in Chepstow. And indeed, clearly, we've got a duty to all our customers to ensure that there's a quality provision and a wide range in provision across Monmouthshire. I think, again, going back to the visit Francis and myself did 2 days ago, we recognised and spoke to the team there and the staff, and they've got some brilliant ideas about how things could be modernised with quite limited investment. I think it's slightly incorrect to say that Caldecott has got a new leisure centre. It's in a similar condition. There was limited funding from the 21st Century Schools to actually do anything with the leisure centre at Caldecott, and the two centres in the south find themselves in similar situations as regarding the experience. Whilst the staff are exceptional and they do their best, there is no doubt there needs a significant investment in the two sites to maintain quality provision and something that customers would continue to pay for. We've seen a slight drop-off, more worryingly, at the Caldecott site than the Chepstow site, that continues to flourish. Chepstow had an investment probably about 12 or 13 years ago now, and looking around the site, it definitely does need another similar type investment. But of course, we go back to the business side of it and affordability. We need to make sure that the latent demand is there, and I believe it is in the south. It's a growing area, and health and well-being is on the increase as everyone realises the benefits of exercise and positive mental health. So I think there will be investment in the south in both of the leisure centres, because there needs to be from a business sense. So I would be very confident in the fact that we would be putting some resources into those two sites.
Councillor David, do you want to follow up on that? Otherwise, I'll ask a question, because I wanted to follow up on that. in terms of outreach over the other side of the border, and obviously there's some South Gloucestershire's got us focused particularly around Lydney. I think there's some element in Wydeen. Is there some leisure provision there? But as councillors in the south, in and around Chepstow area, we're seeing huge amount of development going on in the Forest of Dean and South Gloucestershire. What is our expectation in terms of reach across there? Because we'll, for those just on the other side of the border, we're going to be far closer than Lydney.
Yeah, we're experiencing quite a lot of drift across from England into Chepstow. In particular, I think the services in the Forest, I think they're rationalising some of their services. So I know we've got a lot of contact with schools that want to come across and use the swimming pool. I think there's a big opportunity there. You're quite right to say. Again, latent demand drive time within 10 to 15 minutes of Chepstow now. There's a considerable amount of housing both in England and across. So I think it's one that we would definitely look at to improve services, increase some expenditure there to maximise. I think certainly our offer at the moment in Chepstow is certainly above average. Should we say it's not? I wouldn't want to say that it's not, because I know members, obviously customers tell us if it's not. So at the moment we're holding a good retention rate. Members are staying and they're enjoying their experience. But I know that it is an experience that's now 10 to 15 years old, and I think we do need to invest in those sites and marketing as well, which I think everyone realises that we haven't spent enough on our marketing over the years. Our brand is probably not as established as it should be, and our reach is not as wide as it should be. So we were certainly looking to target some of those areas to get people to come and join, and families and stay with us.
Okay. In terms of, I was obviously really pleased when you said, in terms of focus on outcomes and impact, and that's absolutely right. In terms of what we're trying to do, yes, we're trying to wash our face, to ensure that there are continued service provision longer term for residents, but as an authority, we're trying to make the health and well-being of our citizens better, and that's crucial for me. So, what have we got in terms of baseline measurement for community well-being and the health and well-being of our communities? Have we got that data within the county? I know the regional partnership boards have been doing regional work in terms of assessment priorities for health, but have we got that sort of baseline data that we can work from?
There's ongoing work with this, because the data is within the local authority and partners, and it's held in different areas. I know there's a workshop on Monday where we're looking at the well-being and who holds data and which different data could be available. Obviously, under GDPR, the sharing of data has become more relevant, and quite rightly. But I know there's baselines in schools now from measurements over many years. There's been measurements taken, so there is some data there. But clearly, all our partners, housing associations, schools all hold different types of data. So the work Matthew Gatehouse and Pete Davis are doing on well-being and trying to bring that all together, I think there's a workshop on this coming Monday, just to not start, because we've already started in creating active Monmouthshire, and the groups work and try and work on the different types of physical activity and health benefits. But I think the data is in different compartments, should we say, and it's the unlocking of that and bringing together some of the work Matthew's involved in with National Resources Wales about their outcomes and how many people are walking in the rights of way networks, how many people are using Coastal Path. It's all relative data and all important data, but establishing those is a massive challenge for the PSB, and one that I think they are taking on. So and of course the obesity strategy, which has got little components. So it is coming all together, and I think it's starting to do a framework, and I think that's work the members probably would be cited on as we move forwards.
Okay, Francis, do you want to come in on that?
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that the PSB have been looking at is around the Gwent Futures data, and there's a lot of health and well-being information that they gather in there, as well as the happiness index, and some of you will have seen those came round recently. I think that information is due to be launched in November, so that will give some information. But what's critical here is the role that the ADM will play in contributing towards those indicators and how we monitor that contribution as well. And that will need to be thought about, because there are lots of these things that are going to be out of the control of the ADM in actually meeting those targets. So we will need to think about the actual piece that they can and can't play within that. And some of these things are more difficult to make quantifiable within a performance target or a KPI. So those things need perhaps a little bit more thought, and I think will need to be reflected in the performance framework, either as it develops over time or before the final document is approved. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Matthew. Yeah.
If I could just add a little bit to that, we've experimented in practical terms on some of the countryside landscape work on the Living Levels Landscape Partnership. We've tested with Natural Resources Wales their health impact toolkit, and that's helped develop the second stage of the project, and also helped develop the toolkit as well. We're one of the first sort of large-scale projects to use that. We've also been doing, in terms of the museum service, quite a bit of work around the Happy Museum initiative. And that really is at the heart of what we mean by developing an outcome measurement framework. As Francis has said, one of the difficulties with this is being, the level of investment that is potentially involved in measuring outcomes. So it's about designing things that we can do in our day-to-day work, rather than, if I take, say, a walking example, there isn't really any need any longer to do baseline work to identify the mental and physical health benefits of access to the countryside. That is academically established. So what we need to do is to come up with relatively simple ways of measuring the amount of impact that we're having, rather than the sort of more complicated ways which are going to be beyond our ability to measure. So that really is totally what developing the outcome measurement framework is about. And that's why we're piggybacking off this other charity, because that's exactly what they've spent the last 3 or 4 years working out, is how they can measure those sorts of things, but without, in a way, I have to say, as a national charity, they're chucking the sorts of money at it that we could only dream of, but we're sort of scale it down into a sense. So that's definitely what the outcome measurement group is doing, because having identified those pillars, the next step of the task and finish group is to start to identify what our aspirations in terms of the outcomes that we're looking to achieve against those in terms of our service delivery. And then the difficult bit, which is then how do you actually start to measure that? The work that we've been paralleling has had quite an academic impact at that stage, input at that stage, and we're envisaging that we will need to get some external advice in order to build that up in a way that actually builds something that can last for some considerable time, because we're hoping that outcome measurement framework isn't just a flash in the pan, that it's something that can still be what we measure both in this business plan period for 5 years and then potentially for the next 5 years as well. So it's not going to be quick, but we are working on that as a sort of underlying principle.
Okay, I got another technical question, and that was focused on the FOI and FOI legislation. Just wondered, is the company and charity disclosure exempt? It suggests we're not. I just wondered what the status was of that.
As far as I'm aware, we've put that information into here because obviously we're trying to develop a framework here that runs across both the TECL and the charity. I'm not sure whether we're entirely clear as the extent to which the FOI relates to some of the charitable activities, but it definitely would in relation to the TECL activities. I'm looking at the back of the room because I think...
Yeah.
No, I believe with the general feeling is we'll be open and transparent. Clearly, FOI would still apply to whichever side of it. So we were of the opinion that because we're open, it would be the same as is now.
Okay. Francis? Yeah.
Sorry, this microphone's not behaving. Yes, I'm going to start hitting it now. One of the things that will be bottomed out within the contractual documentation is how the council will manage that process with the company, both parts of it, with the MonLife and MonLife Plus, and how the speed at which they will need to respond back to us in order for us to be able to comply with our duties. So that will be tied down within the contractual elements, and we'll set out exactly how those mechanisms will work back and forth. Thank you.
Okay, in terms of external advisors, and you've suggested there been it sounds like a number of external advisors beyond the legal team who we already know. Were there any other additional advisors that have come in, particularly in the last few months, to work on some of this stuff? Just interested to know. Fine. In terms of KPI as well, and around staff, from my personal perspective, as a sort of model employer within the county, I hope we're encouraging. Well, I know we're encouraging our staff to go and beyond their pay duties and to explore other volunteering opportunities. Could that be potentially a KPI that could be looked at in terms of how staff are volunteering or are volunteering their time beyond their work capacity? Because it would be a great picture to pull together. And we as councillors, we all talk about the great social capital that we've got in the county, and a lot of that starts with our workers. I know a lot of people give a huge amount of time. I mean, I know a number of colleagues who work here, who give an extraordinary amount of time in and around the Chepstow area for various different things. But I just wondered if that could be something that could be captured as well.
Yeah, it's certainly something we can look at, and as you say, we know that staff are committing large numbers of hours of volunteering, and that's definitely something that we can look at in terms of this framework.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions at this stage? No? Go on.
I'm going to go slightly off-piste here, because I think in terms of the Future Generations Act, we have to be careful here because, there's no way that this ADM model or Monmouthshire County Council on its own is going to make a significant impact on some of those challenges that there are out there. It requires all the organisations, including the Health Board and many others, work into an integrated plan, I think. And I think that's what the key is, to get... I happen to know a little bit about some of the initiatives that the United and Bevan Health Board are doing because I'm on the Health Council. And there's a lot of very good stuff in there. But what I would like to see is a plan that actually integrates it all together. We have a lot of social capital, third sector bodies, but are we making the most of those, the facilities and the skills that they have? And what is the vision? Because once you've got a vision, you can start working a plan to integrate things around it. And I sometimes think that we're working more as silos rather than working as a specific one organisation which has a vision and a target in place. So sorry for the little spiel, but I think until we do that, we're not going to make significant progress. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Good points made there. Councillor Davey?
Just to follow up on what Alan has said, bearing in mind the issues we've got with Chepstow Hospital as well, and that is effectively by the side of the leisure centre, one would wonder if there isn't opportunity to approach an Iron Bevan and see if there is some of the facilities that they have there which will work with the leisure centre. I mean, this whole thing is beginning to become interlocked in various ways, but I would have thought it's in both the interests of the hospital potentially and the leisure centre to see if they can find some mutual benefit out of being so close to one another.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I know we've spoken about this as previous discussions around ADM and the driver for community prescribing or social prescribing. I think the primary care are changing that now to social referral. I think is the new terminology. But you're absolutely right. There's huge scope there to work with the NHS. Did any other comment? Oh, sorry, Matthew.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chairman, that we've just secured a very small amount of money direct from the Health Authority to pilot some work around physical activity with the sports development team and to do a pilot of the potential wider dementia project, a Creative Active Lives project. So that's just been secured now for this current financial year. So hopefully that might be the beginning of a longer-term relationship as well. So those conversations are going on.
Okay, any further comments? No? Okay, then, so we focused on, what the relationship is going to look like. And I think, Councillor Fegans was absolutely right. As shareholders, we need to have that, not just the right reporting mechanisms, but to understand in a transparent, visible way how the relationships are going to work between Cabinet Council and the new construct, to ensure that various different things in terms of value for money and what the council is going to get out of this, and culpability on various things where that lies. That's important. I think Councillor Strong and Councillor Dovey looked at the in terms of future investment and how that would look. Councillor Dovey in particular wanted to focus on the Chepstow area, given the time scales for the school's capital development, and that's going to be a longer time period going into the next decade. In terms of targets, I think we've said that needs to be the critical KPIs. I think as Councillor Davis said, we need to focus on that, and I think that's been taken on board. We spoke about impact and outcomes on community, and what that looks like as well, just beyond our static fixed assets, and I think Matthew focused on the living landscape and the benefits that has for residents. Excuse me. Obviously, we're really pleased that officers have looked at best practice examples across in England, both in the charitable sector and elsewhere. That's really positive. Don't invent the wheel. If there's some great models and frameworks out there, let's utilise that. And you spoke about partnerships and around data, who holds the data and how we share that data. RSL, schools, LHB, Natural Resources Wales. There's a number of partners that we're working with, and we can use to capitalise on that data to ensure that we've got a strong baseline. But also, as the ADM develops, we're going to be a considerable contributor to that, to generating data longer term. So that's obviously important. So I think we've covered off a bit. We've still got a lot of work to do as a committee on this, because we are taking the lead in terms of the overarching scrutiny function. I think in terms of November, I would imagine all our November meeting is going to be focused on ADM, and that will probably be an extended meeting. That'll probably be an all-day meeting, no doubt. The offer has been made or suggested by Councillor Feakins, and it's up to colleagues whether we want to work on developing a workshop for not just this committee, but for wider members, so everyone is aware of where we're at, where we're going over the next few months, because it's going to be a critical few months leading up to Christmas. Are we happy that we facilitate that workshop, but we'll get members in, but I can obviously liaise with Kathy and Francis in terms of trying to find the optimum date and where you're at with your various work streams. So if you're happy, we'll take that forward. So I think that's everything. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. So the next item, item number 6, is revenue and capital monitoring outturn statement. Mark, you're going to come down the front? Yeah. Thanks. Let's go. Okay, are we all okay? So Mark, do you want to just give us a brief intro of the report, and then I'll open it up to questions then. Thank you, Mark.
Good morning, members. This report follows a very similar format to periodic reports you normally receive on the monitoring. So it's twofold in nature, in giving members a full understanding of what's happening on financially across the council, given the expectation from your electorate that you're informed about the general workings of the council, and then it goes into specifics about the portfolio that relates to economy and development specifically. So the outturn based on month 2 information, and you can appreciate that's pretty early in the financial year. Forecast to outturn involves an outturn which, without change, would incur a 471k deficit. The one thing I am clear about is that probably isn't going to be the outturn, because obviously part of the purpose of the monitoring report is as a management tool to improve practices. And you'll see in one of the subtables there that actually there is a general trend for officers to recognise that they've got savings challenges that they need to put in place. They're quite prudent with those early on in the year. Management teams then are driving the position through in terms of making extraordinary changes or ad hoc savings to combat volatility. To the extent in the last couple of years we've always successfully managed to be the right side of the surplus line. So to a certain extent I feel a bit of a doom monger telling you that the position is going to be £471,000 deficit, recognising there's an awful lot of the year left to go. It also explains that at month 2 the capital presumption is largely neutral, in that service managers presume that the money that they've been allocated from council will be fully spent, other than some small slippage in 21st century schools, which isn't unusual because those are the 2 largest projects of the council, and those involve paying retention that you generally wouldn't pay until 12 months after the completion of the work. There's a common message concerning earmarked reserves decline. I ought to be clear that actually there's a distinction between the council fund reserved and earmarked reserves. As members, you've ascribed to the financial planning policy that your council fund reserve will be between 4 and 6% of your net expenditure, and that is currently met at about 5%. Earmarked reserves, you don't actually need to hold them unless you have a specific use for them. So they're built up for a specific use, and once that use has been met, you effectively don't have to hold them again. So the reality is that at a simplistic level, you could hold 0 earmarked reserves and still meet your financial planning assumptions. The weaknesses, I think, are that a lot of those reserves in the past were predicated on the re-engineering required in local authorities given the public sector financial environment. So it involved putting money aside in things like IT reserves for developing new services, automating things that may be more economic, investor redesign, priority investment reserve, and things like the redundancy reserve. So probably the risk to members is that in an environment of a declining earmark reserve, your ability to influence change utilising reserves is perhaps more limited than it has been in the past. In terms of getting on to specifics for this committee, probably the most important table is paragraph 3.12, where I've usefully broken down the services and where they currently, their pressures and their surplus situations for the year. And I've also included last year as a useful comparison for you as to where the services ended. I believe there's a degree of optimism bias around some of those figures. I fully expect month 7 to be worse in certain areas than better. And if I give you a couple of examples on that, one would be children's services, where there is a volatility in costs that is difficult to forecast with any certainty. One childcare case could easily cost over £100,000. The other area which I'm a bit surprised about, but I think which will work its way through before the autumn, is around interest in the tourism, leisure and culture area, which predicts at the moment a £58,000 deficit. That wouldn't be intuitive to be on the basis of past deficits that service has incurred, and certainly the conversation with members around the need to progress an outsourcing of Mon Life has been based on the fact that it wasn't sustainable internally. So you might want to test that out with colleagues when it comes back to council for final decision. Paragraph 3.2.2 is the economy and development specific commentary, and it explains to you the various peaks and troughs in terms of expenditure, and it also includes the outgoing chief officer's commentary concerning the service that recognises it's probably going to be a hard year, but they've started it very well. I have certain reservations across the piece, not related to economy and development, that are included in paragraph 3.31, where actually I would expect in this environment of financial austerity, certain conditions to be present in the organisation that aren't perhaps as robust as they could be. So things like making specific changes where savings aren't likely to be achieved. Members originally signed off those savings. Obviously, it would be beholden on officers to come back and explain to them what they're going to do differently. There are also things about the accountability that I think could be improved in the present environment, which you may be interested to have a look at it in your own time. Savings are included in paragraph 3.4 and specifically for E&D in paragraph 3.4.6. Of the savings targets associated with economy and development, you may remember that Kelly took the responsibility collectively for the future Monmouthshire aspect, whereas the effect of that saving is felt throughout the council. And it's those two savings around reductions in the use of agency costs and travel costs that are the ones that are experiencing a degree of churn at the moment. I would say historically, it's generally those generic savings that are enforced by the centre that tend to be the ones that aren't delivered, largely because there isn't the ownership in the directorates to do so. So it's not a surprise that those are the areas of contention. Capital is in paragraph 3.5. There's limited capital expenditure in economy and development's portfolio. There's a small budget for remedial capital works, which has been incurred in full. There's a budget for a capped ceiling price for the purchase of Carwent House. There's a small budget for Woodstock Way Section 106 retentions. And perhaps the single biggest element is the Capital City deal contribution of 1.1 million, which is the lion's share of the 1.2 million within your committee area. The next paragraphs talk about reserves. We've covered those at the start. One or two of you may hold a governorship in schools. What we're trying to do there is improve the the quality of forecasting such that actually it doesn't mean that I end up coming back to members and suggesting that there will be widespread changes in the amount of school reserves and pushing it into deficit balances when, to give you an example, schools collectively forecast 800,000 use of reserves last year that would have pushed it into a large deficit position. By the end of the year, they'd only utilised collectively £100,000. So what we're trying to do is better tie the recovery plan process to their original consideration that they will move into a deficit and better align those so that actually they just pause to think that whether they will move into a deficit or whether it's easier to actually mitigate those problems within a year. And at that point, I appreciate it's been a fast and furious précis. I'm happy to take any questions.
Sorry, thanks, Mark. Francis, did you want to say anything at this stage, just to, as you coming in, just to looking at the budget situation? Did you want to say anything?
Sorry, I'll get used to the microphone, sorry. Not at this stage, obviously, early days for myself, but the portfolio that I'm responsible for will also include the head of operations context going forward, and there are some pieces that will remain within the chief executive's portfolio, so there will be some changes in the future reporting of where those portfolios are sitting in the commentary that will be provided by myself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Mark, in 3.7.3, you point out the increasing significant risk to the council with regard to capital receipts. Can you expand a little bit on that? What is the significant risk that you see?
The risk is predominantly around the Future Schools capital programme. Members subscribe to a position that from a cost of £40 million, £30 million would be paid for from capital receipts and £10 million from borrowing. At the time they made that decision, they wouldn't have had £30 million capital receipts in the bank. They didn't need to. But obviously the nature of capital receipts is such that they can be progressed over a prolonged period. The risk to the council is felt in the way of interest payments in terms of temporary borrowing that goes to offset that.
So how significant, in a scenario perhaps where we didn't receive all the capital receipts that we're anticipating, how significant would that borrowing be in terms of the council's overall budget control?
When I last checked this, I think we were about 5 million adrift. So the vast majority has come in. Just you can only sell something once, and the easier things to sell we've effectively sold. I think this year it's been encouraging that we've seen some large housing developments come on stream that have been anticipated for a number of years but haven't been progressed for all sorts of laudable reasons. So I think the challenge probably is that for tranche A, i.e. the Caldecott and Monmouth School, that will work itself through within the next 6 to 12 months. The challenge probably for members is that they want to progress a similar standard of school, obviously in the north of the county in favour of King Henry and ultimately Chepstow subsequently. The ability to utilise capital receipts that we haven't got is probably quite restricted, so probably going forward that will have more of an effect and volatility on your revenue budget because that will be afforded by prudential borrowing and a need for headroom in the form of savings.
Thank you, Mark. I'll just make one comment, Chairman, that looking at these figures, the initiative which this committee is pushing forward in terms of procurement, it becomes more and more critical that we push on with that as soon as possible. It's been a year now, I think, since we first proposed that something was done, and we need to pursue that as soon as possible, I think. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, Councillor Davis. Absolutely right. Any questions? I've got, in terms of 3.25 mark, redundancy costs, and you've alluded to the in terms of the attractions function within tourism, leisure and culture. Is there any other update from the cabinet meeting? And are there any indications at this stage with the in terms of the changes to creating a more responsive management structure? What are there going to be any redundancies within that? Are we seeing any proposed figures at this stage?
Yeah, at the time I was writing this report and anticipating the cost of it was the same time that you were considering the repurposing of the attractions aspect. And we had an interesting conversation at that select meeting about the need for that and whether it should be borne by the TLC division and Monlife ultimately, or whether it's the sort of thing that the council should bear. And I think the conclusion that you all collectively drew is that, well, you wouldn't wish to see Monlife start in a position that didn't give them the best opportunity to succeed. But I've also confirmed since then that actually their business plan doesn't seem to cover any eventuality for restructures, which is not necessarily intuitive to be in an environment that describes a vibrant commercial structure, a need for new skills, etc. I think probably the weakness with the ADM approach is that at the moment, a lot of the information that you've received has been largely centred around what is best for tourism, leisure and culture. Probably this report that you're going to receive collectively in November or December time, if I'm right with my timescales, would actually provide a more balanced picture in terms of what will be the consequences to the council. And at that time, it's probably right to actually reconsider what additional enhancement, if any, the council can provide to help with that transition, or indeed whether it needs the Monlife to bear some of the unfortunate pain that local authorities are bearing. Our medium-term financial plan at the moment presumes that the contribution that is paid into Monlife will be consistent and the same for the next 4 years. So effectively, they are. Our planning assumption is they will get a protection that other local authority services won't get. That hasn't been checked or with members, and that's certainly your final decision to make. But those are the considerations that I would expect would be in that latter report.
Okay, Councillor Fegans, I think you want to follow up on that particular issue.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Are you going to have, or is are your team going to have any input from day zero onwards into the ADM in any form? I know obviously you're going to have responsibility still on the MCC side, but are we as the ADM going to have the reassurance that we've got you on board for monitoring our finances as Monlife?
I smile because I bill myself as an acquired distaste. I'm not sure necessarily that that Monlife would necessarily value that, and they are actually a separate organisation from the council. I suspect it will depend on how the organisation crafts its management agreement with Monlife and the degree of oversight that it requires for the contribution that it continues to make. At this stage, I wouldn't say that there's any reason why it couldn't have that oversight. I just don't think we're at that stage in the process yet to actually be able to verbalise how some of those operational activities will do. I will always still have a role in terms of it being a subsidiary part of the council from a statement of accounts point of view.
So that's guaranteed. It will be a subsidiary function or a subsidiary of the council.
The Teckle company will be a subsidiary of the council, so similar to other outsourced agencies or arrangements whereby we hold a role, it will appear in our statements of accounts in terms of expenditure. So another one, for instance, is like Dragon Waste, which we are a proportionate shareholder of. We will be a shareholder in Monlife, and it will feature proportionately in our accounts. In being asked whether I wanted to provide services to Monlife under a service level agreement, my preference is actually to 2P the member of staff across to Monlife, the accountant concerned. I ought to explain that my responsibilities within Monmouthshire County Council are restricted to the accounting and business service side of it. I have another colleague in Ruth Donovan that you may have met that deals with all the systems side of it, all the creditors, etc. It will be interesting whether she views the same approach that, well, actually, Monlife could do this itself or we could facilitate it. I'm not sure of her mindset, but actually part of the approach at the moment is to actually look at the historic cost of central support to tourism, leisure and culture and suggest that's what Monlife needs to pay for services or that's the budget that will transfer to Monlife going forward, and it's up to Monlife to decide which ones it wishes to buy back off the council. I think short term it may very well look to buy quite a lot of it because in setting up a new organisation from scratch you don't want too many moving parts. I tend to equate it very similar to, say, the housing stock transfer, whereby over time, when they get more confident about their abilities, they'll attract from the council and provide services themselves. But what I've tried to explain to colleagues is that, well, if we look at, say, the costs for the leisure services that Ruth would pass on, historically, being part of a larger entity, that would only probably be about £4,000 or £5,000. But if a new leisure agency with museums were getting a ledger for itself, they probably wouldn't get any change out of £40,000 to £50,000. So my view is that, well, actually, understanding that we may very well be losing some costs, there are some opportunities that actually the involvement of staff, our side, is probably more enhancing than it ever was, because actually the ability to set up a new bank account, do all the reconciliations, is far more onerous than just being part of a larger whole. And I would hope that overall, in relation to the opportunity to derive more money from OnLife, against the prospect of deriving less in terms of other services, that we would get to a position that's largely neutral, that members can see that actually there's no net pressure being caused by this that will actually influence your decision.
Yeah, you want to come back, Matt? Yeah.
I'll just come back very quickly on that one there. So just to be absolutely clear, I hear very clearly what you're saying. I'm guessing those conversations haven't been as grounded out as I probably would like to have at this stage, which we'll come back to, I suppose, in the workshop when we come to that point. But from the TECL side, that's definitely resting with you, because that is going to be a subsidiary of, it's a wholly owned company owned by MCC. So those accounts will definitely have to be with you. But on the charity side, that's debatable, and it's going to be how much of that service they want to take on board.
Do you want to come in then, Francis? I was going to bring you in before Alan, but yeah.
Sorry, thank you. From my experience with TECL companies, the accounts do need to be reported into the authority and reported within the governance of the whole organisation, and will set that information out. Again, it comes back to what level of information we require with the MCC hat on, in terms of the frequency that you receive that information, how that will be monitored within this committee and within Cabinet and Council. Do you want it in line with the month 2, month 7 reporting processes? Do you want it on an annual basis? And what granularity you're going to need, and how that will be set out to the TECL company. So that's that part. With the MonLife piece, the accounting will be monitored and managed by the board and the Board of Trustees, but there will be requirements for that to be reported within the council arrangements on normally it's an annual basis from my experience, but you can also have them quarterly or 6 monthly reporting mechanisms, which will also pick up on the financial aspects of how the trust is operating and how it's reporting, and that's something that can be built into those contractual arrangements as well.
Okay, yeah, Matt. Yep.
And just to come back on those points, then, Francis, if I can. For me, I think that it would be probably important for us as a committee to get our heads around what reporting we would like to see come back out of the TECL, to see how frequently that is, so we understand what it is. We probably need to understand exactly how much of the pie the TECL is grasping, and how much of that's going over to the other side. So again, I understand a lot of this stuff is still loose, but it's just to really sort of set it in motion in your mind, if you like, where I think we should be taking it. But I think, yeah, we need to be involved in understanding what we would like to see out of the reporting from the TECL side. The charity side is a self-functioning, that has to do its own reporting back to the charity anyway. And it's got to do a full set of accounts back to the Charities Commission in any event. So that's almost a self-propelled, self-running, hived-off piece of nothing to do with this really, other than an annual report, which could be in effect the same annual report that's submitted to the Charities Commission.
Let's come back on that. What's really important for us, though, is going to be understanding how the company is performing against the money that the council is providing to it on an annual basis, and understanding how it will be delivering against all of those different aspects that sit within it as well. So that's really important too. The company or charity? The charity. Not just the TECL company, the charity as well. We will need to have that visibility around all of those different aspects and how they are performing on financial terms against all of those, and that's a really valid point.
Thanks, Francis. Go on. No, it's all right. No,
Thank you
it's
for,
good. It's good.
for
allowing me. And so really, that's exactly what it comes back to, that reporting element. We need to understand that relationship between MCC and the charity, and the tech is slightly different, I guess, really. But it's the charity. We're getting a service from the charity. We need to know we're getting value for money within that service. We need to know that they're delivering what we ask them to deliver. All of their key performance indicators and everything else is almost separate, really. For us, it's very specific. Are we getting value for money? Are we getting what we paid for?
And it will be, are they delivering against the objectives that have been set out, and that we are able to monitor that clearly. So that's, yes, very, very valid point that we need to develop over the next few months and make sure that's crystallised and very, very clear to everybody.
Okay, I'll just bring Mark in, then I'll go
Yeah,
on
to a
Alan.
certain extent, if you were going to use the statement of accounts as a tool to influence progress, it would be a very blunt tool. I would see this as no different than, say, our involvement in the Wentwide crematoria or archive service, where actually we treat our proportionate bit of it as a related party. It is a small note within the accounts. Actually, it's the management agreement, the what are you going to get for your continuing contribution to Mon Life, whether that be the TECL or the charity. To a certain extent, those organisational structures is immaterial to you. You've signed up to Mon Life in existence. The business practicality has shoved it into two separate businesses, but your management agreement is with Mon Life, not with the TECL company or not with the charity. And actually, I think probably that management agreement needs to cover off things like where they're making savings, how those are utilised back into the organisation. At the moment, there's an interesting conundrum whereby the buildings and their maintenance is staying with the council. Yet without those buildings and maintenance, you're not necessarily going to make those big investments, those big changes to services. And if the expectation is that the council's going to do that, well, the council's priorities in terms of capital investments probably haven't changed. They might need to as a result of their relationship with Mon Life, and that may be one of the symptoms or reasons why the Mon Life consideration came to you. But increasingly, you're going to find that the council is going to get a little smaller with this element being hived off. The management agreement is your way to make sure that you get your value for money out of the contribution that you're paying for.
Okay, Alan. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to hear that, actually. But what it highlights to me is the point that Matt made earlier, that really there's a lot of us don't quite really understand what's going on. And I must admit, I've probably read the ADM documentation so many times I can say some of it word for word. But I heard things today that I wasn't really getting from that documentation. For me, the TECL company is key. There's a lot of potential there. There's also a lot of risk, I would suggest. So I'm very pleased that, the accounting, etc., is within the council's remit, because in my humble opinion, accountants, good ones that is, are worth their weight in gold, from my personal experience, and can help a lot in those business processes as well. I'm still a little bit confused about how this is going to be managed and who's going to be managing it, etc., etc. But I'm learning a little bit here that I wasn't quite aware of, and we need that workshop, I think, because there's so many unanswered questions here that we really need to ask. Thank you, Chair.
Francis?
Thank you, Chair. I think taking on board the commentary from the previous agenda item and the focus at the moment around some of the aspects here, I'll take that on board in terms of an action to bring that forward, provide some clarity around it, and perhaps a workshop would be a useful arena for us to just work through the proposals, the governance arrangements, the management arrangements, the legal constructs that are going to be wrapped around this, so that everybody's really clear about what we're considering here, rather than there seems to be some confusion, and I think I just need to bring that back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got one more question, Mark. 3.4.6 on ENT portfolio in terms of agency costs. Is that agency costs across the council, that 80,000, or is that specific to this directorate?
No, it's actually across the council and reflects the fact that future Monmouthshire were going to take that critical lead in it, and that the future Monmouthshire team reported to Kelly, as was.
That's fine. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Councillor Devi?
You won't be surprised, I'm going to hark back to what I've asked questions about before, and that is, you were saying that the risks going forward, and you itemised certain projects, and you raised the projects of the two schools, Abergavenny and Chepstow again. We're supposed to be having Abergavenny, the dig in the first cut, relatively soon. But again, it is the Chepstow issue is way down the road, if you like. I'd like to have some idea of what you think, how grave you think the possible risks are to, well, I'll stick with Chepstow, and well, you could say Abergavenny as well, but I'll stick with Chepstow in the main for me, as to whether we think the whole project, there is a threat to its coming about, or is the threat limited to the sort of school we might end up with at Chepstow, and that whether that would be acceptable to elected members and the public of Chepstow as a whole.
Okay. I don't want to stray too far away from our portfolio area, but I'll allow this question just once. Councillor Devi.
And I'm not sure I might answer it to your satisfaction, because I don't have sanctity of decision here. What I'd remind you of is that the capital programme and the capital priorities is set by this council annually. Clearly, they've recognised the value of the Tranche A schools. It's a standard of education that they want to provide across the piece. I think it's simply a case of actually where we're deriving resources partly from another funding source, i.e. Welsh Government. To a certain extent, we have to abide by their timescales and when they've got resources. Equally, though, I can also understand the perspective to just pause on the Chepstow situation until we can actually better see the demand for those services, given things like the bridge deregulation. So if that's in tranche B+1 or tranche C, I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea from a pragmatic point of view.
Thank you for bearing with me, Chair. I'm not sure I got the answer I wanted. There you go.
Okay, any other further questions? No? Okay. Thanks, Mark. Your forthright analysis is always welcome here, and I think that, particularly on that ADM discussion, which added to the additional agenda item, I think that was really useful. And, you know, as Councillor Davis had suggested, you know, the need of the workshop is quite critical now. So thanks very much. Thank you for your time. Yeah, you can. Thank you. Okay, item 7 then, to confirm the following minutes. So 7.1 was the special meeting of E&D Select, dated the 13th of July. Yep. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, do I have a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Devi. Yeah, all in agreement? Yeah, thank you. 7.2 then is the E&D Select Committee dated the 19th of July. Yeah, and we have a seconder for that. Councillor Davis, all in agreement? Yeah, thank you. Okay, item 8 then is the E&D Select Forward Work Programme.
Hang about. Thank you.
I'm going to deny Paul an opportunity, yeah?
Thanks for that, Matt. Right, yes, we've got a few things coming up, obviously with Welsh Government not attending today. Around the Superfast broadband, we will be writing a letter on behalf of the Chair and inviting them back. The next meeting that we have is the special on Friday the 19th of October. As the Chair is unable to attend, Councillor Davis will step up to the Chair. This one's on the LDP annual monitoring report and the planning annual performance report. We'll be inviting along the members of the planning committee for that. A couple of things to be confirmed are the Velathon update. Run for Wales are keen to come in and speak to you all as far as any benefits the county has had with the Velathon. And again, the other to be confirmed item is the cross-border issues workshop along with the Forest of Dean Council, which will be extended hopefully out to all members. Something that you've been very keen from the start to get going. We have the ADM scrutiny of final documents on the 22nd of November. That will be opened out to all members, but as Frances said earlier, I'll liaise with Francis as far as a workshop to confirm governance, management arrangements. You know, obviously officers are very keen that you know that all your questions have been answered, all your questions have been understood. So that's really important. So we'll hopefully get that in ahead of the 22nd of November meeting, so that when you come to that meeting, obviously you will finally understand and be able to provide final scrutiny. Then later on now into the autumn, we have the draft budget proposals for 1920. Pete Davis will let us know when that information is available, so that'll be a special to look forward to, as ever. And the last one, which is more pertinent to the Chair and Vice Chair, is I've had a date for the City Deal Joint Select Scrutiny, and that's Monday the 15th of October, 12:30 till 5. Obviously, Councillor Pavia and Councillor Davis as our representatives of MCC will be going along to that. So as soon as we have more information on that, I can give you that, and then obviously you can feed that back to the committee.
Okay, Councillor Fegans.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul. Paul, just say that workshop that we have, I think we need to do everything we can possibly to encourage every single member to come along, because that's one of the probably most significant decisions we're ever going to make. And I'm guessing that we're going to be asked to make that decision coming in December. And I think people need a lot of questions answered, and it makes more sense to have everyone in the room than it on that one day.
Yeah, definitely. Completely agree with that, as I'm sure Francis will. Obviously, the invite will go out as soon as we get the workshop date. And I can certainly send a polite message to all the party leaders to encourage attendance for their members.
Councillor Davis and I are meeting with Peter Davis very shortly to discuss the procurement work. And as Councillor Davis already alluded to in the meeting, this needs to be driven on a pace now. You know, we've been going a year on this. We were hoping that things would be in place ready for this, you know, budget round, and that is still our expectation, and you know we'll keep pushing that message forward, and ensure that work is going to be done, because it's going to be critical. In terms of beyond Christmas, I know there's another few issues that are on our agenda to look at. ICT in schools was one of them. I'd like to do potentially a joint select with CYP on that, and try and understand in terms of our return on investment with our hardware projects, how that's impacting on our schools, and there are a number of other things, but I think the ICT one would be good for the early in the new year. Velathon, definitely, we've been requesting them for about 2 years now to come in and speak to us. So we'll keep pushing that. I would be. It certainly would be remiss of us not to do that due diligence, and in terms of any other future financing that the Cabinet may like to consider, I wouldn't be pushing for any further funding until that work is done, that scrutiny work is done. So is everyone else happy? Okay, yeah, Councillor Davis. Can we have an update on that work stream, Francis? Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We'll build that into the forward work programme then, and I'll get something brought back in on that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the reminder. So then item 9 is the Cabinet Business Forward Work Programme. Are there any items there that you feel that we need to examine in the autumn? Anything that's coming up? I was interested on that, the statement on gambling policy and proposals for casinos. I mean, is that going to be our new venture? Is it?
If I could just come in on that.
Oh, okay. As chair of licensing, yes.
Yeah, there are no plans to open a casino in Monmouthshire.
There are some.
There are not.
Oh.
Oh.
Good. So in terms of that policy, Brian, is it just ensuring that the council has a policy and they were fine? That's okay. I couldn't see anything at this stage that would jump out and say, you know, we need to look at this. But you know, if members in their own time do see something, please, you know, let me know. So then item 10 is the next meeting. So we've got the special meeting is on Friday the 19th, as Paul has indicated. Pre-scrutiny is at 9:30 for a 10 start. And then Councillor Davis is going to be in the chair for that. And then our next ordinary meeting is going to be the 22nd of November. But obviously there'll be probably that workshop will be somewhere in between that. And we may need to call another special meeting for additional business. Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time and contributions.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, Councillor Dovey, sorry.
Just one thing, Chair.
Sorry, can you just use your microphone?
Just one thing that I have a little concern about. There are meetings going on with the Forest of Dean and Mont-CC. And I'm a little worried about the fact that there are meetings going on and nobody seems to know about them here. For instance, on the 19th, there was a joint working group with Mont-CC and the Forest of Dean in the council offices in Colford. And the other thing that bothers me slightly, so we had Mont-CC officers going to speak to a local council. What I'm saying is their structure doesn't match up with ours, if you understand what I'm trying to say. And I think we should explore how we get the right people to these meetings, because all of a sudden everybody wants to talk and everybody's interested in facilitating it. And I tried to go to all of them to find out exactly where we're going and what we're doing, but particularly about transport. And that's a good example, because the meeting I went to, they didn't have anything to do with transport. That was another committee that they had, which is an economy and transport committee, which I've been to. So what I'm saying is we need to do a bit of work between both bodies in making sure we're getting the right people to the right meetings.
Yeah, in terms of that meeting, I was invited to the to that cross-border meeting, and it is part of our cross-border work stream. It was facilitated by our officers, with officers of Forest of Dean. James Woodcock was leading on that, and I think he's the element in our forward work programme when he's going to come back to the committee and widen it up and bring and ask Forest of Dean to come across to one of our scrutiny meetings. So that's what's going to happen. That was just sort of an initial sort of reach out, and then they're going to come to one of our future meetings.
I wasn't trying to be smart, Chairman. I was just posting that there are sometimes you're talking differently, and they say, "Oh, well, that isn't me," if you not me, Gov, and that's really a waste of time. And could I make one other thing? We had we're streamed today. This has been another time when we've had the committees being streamed, other committees as well, and when we go to kick off, the streaming doesn't work. And so the public are not getting the full impact, if you like, of us in all our glory, because the IT isn't working. In my day, the one thing you did, especially if the public were involved and management were involved, you made sure that what you were going to present was working. In my day, it was carousels and slides in the early days. It's moved on a bit now, I suppose. But the fact of the matter is, I think if we're going to have a presentation, and this is an important group, if we're going to have a presentation, then it should be tested out to ensure that the IT is working, because it makes us look an awful lot less than professional, to be truthful. If we're having difficulty keeping up with it as the officers go through, there's no chance anybody's going to manage to do that on their own.
That's a fair comment. We'll feed that back, and I'm sure Francis will take that back as well to
It's
the
been
director of
raised
staff.
before, Chair.
Yeah,
It has been
yeah.
raised before.
Okay.
It's Sarah had to go at it before you.
Okay.
Thank you.
That, we will ensure that those comments are feedback, and you're absolutely right. You know, in terms of presentation, it should be working. But sometimes glitches do happen. But I'll make sure that's fed back. So thank you for that. Okay. Any further comments? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. See you soon.